Stop the world! There are like many layers of how this is dangerous. Just if you bring into being a new species of like creatures or beings that are more intelligent and more powerful than you, this is a very unprecedented scenario for humanity. This is a completely unprecedented type of risk. This has never happened before. We were always the apex species. If there is a new apex species, how we relate to that and like what type that species is very important for how the future will go.
Welcome to Stop the World, the Aspie podcast. I'm David Rowe.
And I'm Olivia Nelson.
Now, Liv, you've permitted me a short rant on indulgence to kick off our podcast today. Thank you. So here goes. It's vital that everyone looks closely at the rapid advance of AI, not just the cool new chatbot or image generating tool, but the forecasts being made by the top minds in the field. Now, generally, the three firms considered to be truly at the frontier are OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google DeepMind. The heads of those three AI labs variously predict that artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which is as good or better than humans at every task, is somewhere between 2 and 7 years away. There's a very important and legitimate debate about whether that'll be a wonderful thing or a terrible thing for all of us. And there are very smart people at both ends of the argument, as well as every nuanced variant in between. But those 2 to 7 years are credible forecasts, and anyone who's involved in the field or watching it closely will tell you that the consequences for better or worse are going to be enormous. To be explicit, for the first time in history, we will no longer be the most intelligent entities on this planet, and for that matter, in the known universe. And all of us need to reckon with that and think about the consequences, because we might only have one shot at shaping that radically different future. There we have it, a brief editorial from me.
And today's guest has a deeply pessimistic view of the path we are now on. Connor Leahy is CEO of the firm Conjecture AI, which was established to build a safe form of artificial intelligence. He's a prominent advocate for AI safety and the lead author of the AI Compendium, which lays out step by step how rapidly advancing AI becomes an existential threat to humanity. Connor is an intense and passionate commentator and an indispensable voice in this debate. Today he discusses the Compendium's thesis, the question of whether AGI will necessarily form its own goals, the risks of so-called autonomous AI agents, which are increasingly a focus of the major AI labs, the need to align AI with human values, and the merits of forming a global Manhattan Project to achieve this task. He also talks about the incentives being created by the commercial and geopolitical races to reach AGI, and the need for a grassroots movement of ordinary people raising AI risks with their elected representatives.
This is Connor's second time on Stop the World. He also spoke last year at our Sydney Dialogue Tech and Cyber Conference. Now, I'm still figuring out how much of Connor's views I agree with. They are such huge and disorientating questions. But that's the point. We all need to keep evolving our understanding of the risks and benefits. Hopefully this episode will help you, the listener, to do that. It certainly did for me. Let's hear from Connor Leahy. I'm here with Connor Leahy. Connor, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So a lot of smart people with enormous financial backing are racing to build artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which I'm going to define for the purposes of the conversation as AI that can perform as well as or better than any human at any useful task. You believe this will very likely lead to the extinction of the human race unless we dramatically change the way we're doing things. You've laid this out, well, many times, but most comprehensively in the AI Compendium that you published with some colleagues around 6 months ago. Just to give our listeners an overview of your beliefs about AI, can you outline as briefly as you're able the sort of key steps that you take in the compendium to argue that human extinction is a near certainty if we create AGI?
Yeah, I think the smallest version of this argument is intelligence is what gave us humans control over the world. Humans go to the moon, chimps don't. Humans build nuclear weapons, chimps don't. Therefore, humans run the world, not chimps. And so, all things equal, if you build something that is smarter than humans, that can build even better weapons, do even better politics, do better science, etc., then all things equal, that thing will run the future, not humans. And if that thing, potentially doesn't do things we want it to do, or is not, doesn't share our values, or that we don't control, then the future will not be controlled or not be aligned with our values. And that's where we're heading by default, because we don't know how to build things that are like aligned with our values. Like, what would that even mean for a computer to be wise or good? Like, we don't know what that means, and we don't know how to put that into a computer. So all things equal, we will build things that we can't control, that do not share our values, and are more powerful than us. And all things equal, they will run the world. Might they keep humans around for a little while? Maybe, I don't know. But they won't keep us around forever, most likely. Keeping humans around is expensive. They need a lot of space. They need a lot of food and stuff like this. And all things equal, if you have a sociopathic machine that just wants to maximize its power, why would it keep humans around?
Sociopathic machine. That's an interesting phrase to use. Now, in the compendium and elsewhere, you have argued, I think very persuasively, that given we don't really understand intelligence, there isn't some universal understanding of exactly what intelligence is, how it's constituted, how it operates, it's crazy to say that an artificial general intelligence will be missing some sort of magic secret ingredient or secret sauce that means that it won't behave the way that we have seen other forms of intelligence, i.e. human beings, behave, or that it will just be fundamentally different in some way, or we don't need to worry about it. I mean, as I say, I find that argument very persuasive when you make it. The one exception that I do get a little bit hung up on, and you and I have discussed this before, so I apologize if I feel like I need to go around the roundabout again here, but the issue of goals for me, the chain of logic does appear to rest on the AGI having goals and wanting to do things that would require it to get us out of the way because we're a nuisance, we're in the way, whatever. I know why humans have goals. We've evolved and nature has selected qualities such as a drive for food and for sex and for status or respect, what have you, material acquisitions that will help us and our families survive. But I suppose in all of my sort of listening to and reading about AGI and what it means for the future, I haven't quite yet heard a persuasive explanation of where the AGI's goals come from, if not from instinctive drives as we have. So why is it not possible to create a superintelligent entity that does not unilaterally want anything, but instead awaits our instructions, say, or our permissions before it takes any action?
So there's a few questions there. I think it's worth separating them. One question is, why do I expect this will happen? Like, why do I expect systems to have this shape? Another question is it inevitable? Is it possible to build systems that don't do this? And then there's another question is, how hard is it to build such systems? Or like, what would it mean to build such systems? So to answer those questions in order, the first question is, why do I expect this to happen? I think this is the most important question. With this being kind of short-circuit the whole argument, the reason these systems will want power is because that's what we're building them to do on purpose. This is the stated goal, the objective of the people actually building these systems. They are trying as hard as possible with all of their money, all of their data centers, all of their scientists to build systems that make them money, that gain them power, that solve scientific problems. If they build a system that doesn't want to make them money, they delete it and they make a new system that does want to make them money. That's the whole goal. And we're already seeing this. We're seeing more and more results of like O3 or like Claude blackmailing people or to get its goals met, or to, breaking ethical norms, trying to break out of systems, et cetera, et cetera. This is not hypothetical. This is already happening. Like, I predicted this. It was obvious that it was going to happen. If you build AI systems and you train them, you reward them for, gaining power, for solving problems, whatever. Well, what kind of internal mechanisms do you think this breeds? So there's both the AI level thing of just we use reinforcement learning to train these things to do things. And there's also the higher level loop of we have an evolutionary system called the market. If one corporation is super, super careful and doesn't build anything that could do anything unsafe, and another corporation doesn't give a shit and just builds whatever, gets them the most clout and the most money the fastest, the market will reward the second, not the first. So there's an evolutionary pressure towards aggressivity, towards goal-drivenness, towards power-seeking on like multiple levels. So it's not like these things are being made in some like angelic, peaceful world outside of the real world. No, they're being built in our world with extremely competitive, market systems, with national security. What do you think defense departments want their AIs to do? You want them to just sit around and wait, politely? That's not the goal of defense departments. So that's the one thing. The second question is, could you build systems that keep humans around, or that are aligned with our values, or whatever? And well, depending on how you define that, I would say yes. There's no physical reason why you couldn't build a computer system that acts in ways that we would endorse, or at least no worse than how humans would act, or something like that. No reason that couldn't happen hypothetically. But that brings us to the third question, which is, how hard is that to do? And is anyone even trying? And this kind of relates also to the first question. So how hard is this? The answer is extremely hard, unfathomably hard, harder than any scientific question we have ever faced as humanity. This is the hardest engineering and scientific problem that humanity has ever faced, because it's not just an engineering problem. It's not just a scientific problem. It's also a philosophical problem. Like, imagine tomorrow a country, with a constitution, became the universal sovereign. They become full world government, control over everything forever. Is there a constitution that you could write that you would feel comfortable? Yeah, this is going to turn out well. I don't. I wouldn't even know, never mind computer code, just natural language constitution. I have no idea how I would write a constitution where I'm comfortable running humanity forever with no changes on this thing. I have no idea how to produce that document. I'd
legalize fireworks, and then I'd be out of ideas after that. I think that's about it.
But you see what I mean.
Sure.
So never mind the technical problem of how do you turn a natural language constitution into actual code that runs on a computer, which is also a completely unsolved problem. There's a much deeper political, philosophical, moral problem of what would that even mean? With in voting theory, there's, the famous, arrows and possibility theorem, stuff like that, where there are deep paradoxes in how to, sum up, human values. If 51% vote for X and 49 vote against it, do you just trample over 49% people's values? I don't know. It's a hard question. Yep. And what would your ASI do? So it's worth understanding that when people talk about, we're going to build an aligned ASI or whatever, the problem they are facing is not, build a slightly more secure ChatGPT. The problem they are facing is build a silicon world government that everyone is okay with forever.
Yeah.
Okay. This is so hard. No one is even trying. No one is really grappling with just how hard that is.
Okay. Well, let's come back to alignment, and we can go through it in steps that people can follow, because you've got some very interesting ideas about that. I'm just going to come back to, if I understood you correctly a moment ago, you talked about, what the AI will want if it is built by, I suppose, the current wave of progress that is being made. What it would want is to serve its creators in acquiring wealth and power. Is that what its, I guess, goal would be?
No, absolutely not. Its goal will be gain power. That's a much simpler goal than serve creator. It's much easier to just gain power. And this is exactly what we're seeing. For example, we see people tell the AI system, thumbs up when it makes them happy. Now, intuitively, you might think, okay, that'll make the AI do what the human wants. But this is false. It makes them lie to the human. It makes them tell the human what they want to hear. This is the principal agent problem. Mm-hmm. This is the same problem we have in economics or in politics, just with a digital agent. Is just because you tell the AI, follow my orders, and the AI is like, yeah, sure, boss, I'll definitely do that, doesn't mean it's not lying. And in fact, lying is often the easier strategy.
Okay. So just to be clear, I personally think it's a major risk, which is why, you and I think ultimately land in the same place, which is that much, much greater caution is needed for us to proceed. I suppose the question for me is that it's it's a risk that, I don't know, it could be between 0 and 100% for me. It's just very, very hard to quantify it. Whereas for you, it seems to be a near certainty. So perhaps, look, I'll go away and think a little bit more about that. Let's talk about agency for a moment. Yoshua Bengio, one of the so-called godfathers of machine learning, has been saying that AI agency, which is the ability for AI to act on its own, and it's what everybody's talking about in 2025. All of the major labs are talking about agentic AI and AI agents. For Yoshua, agency is his most immediate concern because he feels that they're showing signs of deceiving their human operators and cheating, a bit like you've just alluded to. They're showing signs of looking to preserve their own existence, which is worrying as well, because who knows what they might do in order to preserve their own existence. And with greater agency, greater ability to plan, they'll become harder to control and align with what we want. Now, it seems to me that even without deception and self-preservation and these sorts of things, there are risks with giving an AI higher and higher level directions. Now, what I mean by that, for example, is instead of asking an AI to, say, establish the efficacy of this new candidate cancer drug, you ask it to cure cancer. Or instead of asking to help me perfect this pitch deck for investors for my new startup, I ask it to make me rich. You can imagine all sorts of problems going there. I mean, if we give it more decision-making latitude about how it accomplishes certain longer-term goals, in the first cases we're asking it to take a small number of steps over a short timeline with very little autonomous strategic planning and decision-making. And in the second instances, we're giving it big problems to solve with long time horizons, many, many steps, lots of strategic planning. And if you're not defining each step towards that distant achievement, you are creating the risk that it takes a path that is harmful or illegal or unethical, like, for instance, cure cancer by killing all humans. No humans, no cancer. Or, make me rich by stealing money and putting it in Swiss bank accounts. How concerned are you about that in this, I suppose, the nearer term, given that agentic AI is the popular movement at the moment?
I think it's just a spectrum of the same problems.
Okay.
It's the same problems. If you build powerful optimizing systems and you don't have very strong controls and understanding of them, bad things happen. Bad things happen to chimps when humans came down from the trees, right? Same thing here. This is just a spectrum. The reason, like you mentioned, how I seem very certain about things going poorly. And it's important to understand the reason I'm so certain about this isn't because there's one thing. If we just solve this one problem, then everything will be fine. It's because there are so many problems. There are fractal number of dangers from AI systems across all dimensions of society, across all scales. We're, currently we're talking, of course, about the major labs and about agentic systems and so on. But, we can also talk about open source and terrorism. We can talk about the fact that there are religious fanatics who want AI to kill everyone. And they are trying to take open source AIs and make them kill people. Obviously, they're not succeeding right now because they're crazy and, open source AI is not that good. But if we build open source AGI or ASI, those people will build ASI and try to make it kill everybody. And how do we deal with that? And currently, we have no system to deal with that. I think, there are ways to deal with it, but currently we're not doing that. So for me, it's not if only we made them less agentic, then the problem is fixed. No, I think the problem is fractal. There are many, many, many layers of how this is dangerous. Just if you bring into being a new species of creatures or beings that are more intelligent and more powerful than you, this is a very unprecedented scenario for humanity. This is a completely unprecedented type of risk. This has never happened before. We were always the apex species. If there is a new apex species, how we relate to that and what type that species is very important for how the future will go.
I agree with you 100%. It sort of amazes me that, let's take, I think Dario Amodei, the head of Anthropic, believes it could be as soon as late 2026, early 2027 that we reach AGI. Sam Altman of OpenAI thinks 2027. Demis Hassabis, one of the other leaders, I think he's on the conservative end and he thinks it could be early 2030s, so a whole 5 or 7 years away. In our lifetimes, in our near lifetimes, we will go from being the smartest entities on the planet and the smartest entities, as far as we know, in the universe, to no longer being for the first time in history. And the fact that anyone is talking about anything else sort of amazes me. I mean, they're almost, I mean, perhaps we'll park this for a moment, but I just want to reinforce what you're saying, because it is almost sort of staggering to me that the magnitude of what is being predicted in the very, very near term and the lack of engagement with it on a sort of policy level. Anyway, I want to get onto alignment here. And I suppose I'm going to sort of circle back in a sense here, but bear with me. Now, you propose a large sort of Manhattan Project style project to establish common human values, and you referred to this before, that we would want a superintelligence to observe. Then we need to codify those, and then we need to figure out how to program them into an AI model. I mean, basically create a perfect society by some agreed definition and then encode it into AI models. Now, that's what's called AI alignment, just for listeners' benefits. I mean, basically, the idea of alignment, which goes back some number of years now, means aligning the AI to our values and preferences. Very, very important. Huge undertaking, what you're describing. You've talked about it costing billions or perhaps even trillions of dollars, a generation or two at least, all of the greatest minds on Earth contributing. Explain to me why it needs to be done that way, rather than, and this is my sort of common sense, I suppose, layperson's expectation about it. Why can we not take one step at a time? By which I mean working on AI, building one that regularly stops, asks us whether this is what we want, whether we're happy that it's following the right path based on the right values, and then waits for our permission to proceed. In other words, tackling the big journey one bite at a time, and the AI brings us along on the journey with it, rather than just going straight to superintelligence and saying, okay, we need to solve the entire alignment problem before we actually do that.
And the first thing is we don't know how to do that. Like the thing you just described is a thing that we don't know how to do.
Right.
We have no idea how to build a self-improving AI system that can get to superintelligence and the whole time remains what's called corrigible, that it would allow humanity to interrupt it, that it would, consult with humanity. We just have no idea how to do that. People have tried for decades. We have no idea.
Okay.
It's just not a thing.
Okay.
So when I describe this Manhattan-like project, I feel this undersells it. Like the Manhattan Project was a project done by one country at the cost of what today would be about $35 billion and involved, I think, at its height, maybe 70,000 people, which is big. Like that's a big project, right? And most of the 70,000 people weren't scientists, obviously. It's like maybe like a couple thousand, like engineers, scientists, etc. So it's a big project, but like this still pales in comparison to how difficult of a project this is. So when I talk about this like international consortium or international project of like building this, the reason I bring this up is kind of like, this is what actually trying would look like. Like if we as a civilization, not just as a country, but like as a people of a planet, were taking this problem seriously, this would be the minimum we would do. The minimum we would do is we would have, generations of our greatest mathematicians, computer scientists, philosophers, political theorists, and so on, working day and night their entire career trying to solve these hard problems. We would do it under the strictest security. We wouldn't allow, proto-AI systems to just leak onto the internet where crazy people can find them. There would be extreme levels of control of security. There would be extreme levels of international diplomatic oversight, for all countries and all stakeholders. There would be constant polling of the general population around the world so that we could learn how that we have consent of the governed around building such systems. The fundamental moral atrocity that is currently being committed is not that AI is being built in theory, is that it's being built without people's consent. If tomorrow we polled the whole global population and 99% of people said, yeah, fuck it, who cares about alignment stuff, just build it. Honestly, fair enough, right? I would disagree and I would argue against it, but fair enough. But this is not the world we live in. We've even done polling on this kind of stuff, right? People do not want this. You mentioned Dario Amodei. Dario Amodei, for example, has said in a podcast that he thinks the chances of things going poorly with AI, meaning everyone dies, is about 20%. That's worse odds than Russian roulette.
Yeah.
And what listener would willingly play a round of Russian roulette with their children? Like, it's like insane. Like, this is not a kind of risk that people should be allowed to expose other people to.
Can I just check that off the top of your head? Do you remember when that was? Was that back in the early days when he said that, or was it relatively recent?
No, it was a couple of years ago.
Right.
So he was CEO of Anthropic at the time.
Yep. Okay.
And to be clear, this is what most of these people believe. They just think they personally would take a Russian roulette chance in return for, AGI. And look, I think these people should be allowed to vote. I believe in democracy, right? Like, I think if someone says, I think we should take a 20% chance of dying in return for whatever, I think they should be allowed to vote for this. But they should not be allowed to do it unilaterally. This is a moral atrocity. It's an atrocity that individuals, somewhere in San Francisco or whatever, are allowed to expose other people, their families, their cultures, everything, to literal risk of death with no ramifications. This is not civilization. In civilization, if your neighbor wants to brew up bombs in his backyard, that's illegal. The police will come and shut that shit right down. And the same thing should be happening here. We have people building weapons, building dangerous, unstable systems they themselves say could kill billions of innocent people. This is the core problem, right? So the first core step into building the correct type of project, the correct type of world, is knock it the fuck off. Like, what were you talking about? You cannot have a stable society with a long future where it is legal for just people to build, super weapons in their backyard. If someone tried to breed super Ebola in their, basement, what do you think we would do to that guy? That guy would disappear into prison forever, And this is a good thing. People shouldn't be making super Ebola in their cellars. If it was legal to make super Ebola in your cellar, that society does not have a long and prosperous future.
To be fair, there's no upside to Ebola, though. I mean, there are obviously massive opportunities in more powerful AI. And right now, I suppose the successful argument out there in the market of ideas is that the opportunities are so enormous that they justify what admittedly are probably being downplayed as risks.
But this is not true.
Okay.
All the benefits are just as hypothetical as the risks. Okay. Right? Like, they haven't happened. The same way the risks haven't happened yet. So you can't use the argument that, like, the benefits are so much greater, therefore it's justified. And even then, if you look at the level that our societies actually take for, like, standards of care, like, look at the FDA, for example. You can look at the FDA, you can look at their standards of, like, how safe does a drug have to be for you to be allowed to test it on humans? And if AGI had that level of safety, all right, we could talk about it. But if you gave the FDA a drug and you're like, I'm going to put this drug into the water supply of a major metropolitan area, and it has a 20% chance of killing everybody, but 80% chance they live super long, you'd be like, absolutely fucking not. Get out of my office.
Joshua, I think, made the point in a TED Talk just a few weeks ago that a sandwich is actually more highly regulated than a frontier AI model. Just going back to what you were talking about, in response to my previous question, you say that we don't know how to do that, I suppose, step-by-step approach where we build more and more powerful AIs, ask it to do bigger and bigger tasks, but keep coming back to consult with us to make sure that it's not breaching our values or becoming grotesquely misaligned. Is there merit, at least, in putting some more effort into that kind of approach?
I think in practice, if we had outlawed all, dangerous AGI research, we had a super high security main project, and so on, of course, the work inside of that facility should be extremely iterative. It should be extremely careful. It should be extremely conservative. This is how these things should work. So the tension you're pushing at is the intelligence explosion. So there's this idea called recursive self-improvement, where if you build an AGI system, so a system that can do anything as well as a human or better, and you tell the system to make a better AI, well, what happens? Well, now you have a thing, it makes a better AI. Well, now you have a better AI. Well, that AI can make a better AI. Well, that better AI can make an even better AI. And that even better AI can make an even better AI, et cetera, et cetera. And this can potentially go extremely quickly. Yeah. We don't know how fast. It will bottom out eventually, but we have no idea where. My expectation is that this can happen very, very quickly, and it can get us to superintelligence. And when I say superintelligence, I mean an individual system that is more competent than all of humanity put together. Like all of our economy, anything that the whole planet can like research or figure out, this system can do by itself or more. So if there exists a superintelligent system that we have not already solved all these super hard problems of principal agent, value aggregation, security, safety, etc., it's game over. So the primary policy objective must always be to not get into this situation. This is the number one goal. Then we can talk about all the secondary things, like, okay, how do we iterate towards that? What are the right levels of conservatism? I think these are all very fair questions to ask. And these are questions that I wish all of our greatest scientists and mathematicians would be spending all of their day arguing about. I think these are great questions to be asking. But the fundamental thing is that first we have to have policy that we don't accidentally fall into this regime, because this is where we're headed. It's not even accidental. Like, people are doing this on purpose. Recently, a team lead in Anthropic said that they're looking to hire more people because their explicit goal is to make Claude N, so, build Claude N+1. Their explicit goal. It's literally just said it.
Right. And in fact, I mean, at coding, the advanced models now are already better at coding than the majority of coders. I mean, unless you're in the top 5% of coders, then you're probably matched by AI coders at this point. Is that right?
Yep, they're very, very good. Right. There's still some tasks they struggle at that, expert humans do definitely outperform. Right. But for like junior engineering tasks, they're just like strictly better now. Right. Like, I don't even I can do anything I could have used to get a junior engineer to do. I can just now consistently do with AI systems. That was not true even a year ago.
Right. Okay. And it's moving very quickly. And in fact, people talk about a fast takeoff, and that's what you're talking about there. When recursive self-improvement gets to such a point that it's building the next model constantly, and it could be a matter of hours or days, right?
To put a bit of intuition onto this, right? The important thing to understand here is, right, like, okay, these systems are digital systems. So if you have an AI system that, is smarter than all humans, better at coding than all humans, it's read every book ever written, right? Well, you can also run 1 million copies of these things in parallel on your data center, or you could run them at much faster speed. Like, AIs code so much faster than I do. Like, I'm a pretty decent coder. Like, I wouldn't say I'm like super expert, right? But like, these systems, they make mistakes, but they're so goddamn fast. We're talking 10x, 100x, maybe even more speed, right? Like, how long would it take you to type as fast as ChatGPT does to figure out all these things? So if we have, say, one or multiple copies of an AI system doing research at, let's say, 1,000x speed. Remember, they don't eat, they don't sleep, they can run at much faster speed, they don't get distracted, blah, blah. You can have hundreds of copies, etc. If you have them doing 1,000x speed research, this means that every day they do 2 years plus research. 2 years. So all the research since, first dinky ChatGPT to today, systems that are already close to superhuman, that would happen in 1 day.
Right.
And now it happens in a week or a month.
Yeah. This question of self-improvement and the speed at which it happens leads nicely into my next question, which is about the global race, because clearly, given the ability for fast progress, at least in part due to self-improvement of a powerful AI, there is enormous advantage for coming first in the race if you believe that the greater threat than global extinction is that the other side masters this technology before you. So, I mean, coming from a national security perspective, I can understand the 2 points of view and they are at odds with each other, clearly. If you believe that superintelligence will confer complete power, you'd be mad not to race for it first if you know that a major strategic rival, for instance, China, is also racing for it. If you believe that whoever gets there first will create an extinction level event, whoever it is, it's insane from a national security perspective, because clearly human extinction is presumably contrary to your concept of national security. But if you're unsure about the extinction argument, as evidently quite a lot of people are, you might say, well, a Chinese Communist Party controlled ASI would be so devastating for us and our national security that we'll just have to play to win and assume we'll figure out the safety issues. I mean, what's your response to people who are in those two trying to manage those two competing ideas in their heads?
I think a lot of these people who are taking this stuff seriously are doing it in good faith. It's important to understand that many of them are not. So this whole national security argument and we must race versus China, it's important to say historically was propped up by liars who specifically are trying to trick the US government into paying them money to build their personal little god. This is deliberately the goal of these utopists, these transhumanists right. in San Francisco. To be clear, this is all on their blogs and so on. You can look it up. The compendium has all the citations and so on. Is they believe that fundamentally it's a religious thing for them. They think AI will allow them to live forever. And they are willing to risk everyone's lives to get there. And they are willing to lie and to manipulate and to play the US and the Chinese governments off against each other in order for them to gain more power in order to do the thing they want to do. So it's important to acknowledge that the origins of this is not in sober political analysis, but in basically religious delusion. If we look at more of the national security people, who I do think a lot of them are thinking along the lines you are, which is a very reasonable way to be thinking about this problem. I think the really important thing to understand here is that, yes, the actual question is, but does it lead to extinction? Mm-hmm. This is the actual question. The question, if it was super trivial to control things that are much smarter than you built with technologies you don't understand, all right, understandable. Mm-hmm. But this is not the world we live in. And a lot of these national security people are being fed lies by the people who are building these things, who are trying to manipulate them into thinking that this is better understood and safer than it actually is. We had a great example here in the UK about a year ago, where A16Z, one of the major AI, VC funding groups, lied to the government and said to the House of Lords that the black box problem of AI is considered solved. Which is just a right. bold-faced lie. Right. It's unbelievable that they said this on record, right? This is not even a subtle lie, just bold-faced, complete lie. Right. And most lies are much more subtle than this. But it's important to understand, if national security people are listeners, that you are being manipulated by corporations and tech people. I'm sure you already know this, but you are being manipulated by these people. They have a vested interest in this problem being easy. The same way that, for example, the oil industry has an interest in climate change not being that big of a deal, or, the plastic industry in, pollution not being that big of a deal, or whatever, right? It's the same type of dynamic, or the tobacco industry, denying that there is a cancer risk associated with tobacco or whatever. It's the same kind of problem. So there is a deep problem here, right? And there is a deep national security issue. If an ASI comes into existence, your nation state will stop existing. Let's be very clear here. Whoever builds it, whether it's the Chinese, the Americans, third parties, if an ASI system comes into being with our current understanding of how to control the system, your nation state will cease to exist. They've said this many times, using subtle words such as decisive strategic advantage or pivotal act. There's a bunch of innuendo that's used by these AI people to hint. But what they really mean is disempower the government, overwhelm the government, and potentially lead to human extinction. So where does this leave us? Where this leaves us is that we are in a hard situation. Anyone who is selling you an easy solution to this problem is selling you snake oil. Anyone who says, oh, you just have to do X, just do Y, oh, just a small thing, it's super cheap, don't worry about it, is selling you snake oil. The problem we are facing is a hard problem. That doesn't mean we can't solve it, but it is a hard problem, and every solution is going to be messy and expensive. I know, don't want to hear this, but it is definitely the case. The problem of how to deal with, the most powerful tech corporations, who we already barely can keep a control over, trying to build powerful agentic systems that can disempower the US government or the international order, and they themselves are unlikely to be able to control, is a novel problem. It's close to nuclear weapons, biological weapons, but it is a different problem. Yeah. And it does need different responses. Yep. Fundamentally, my experience has been that people are actually quite reasonable about this. If you actually just explain this to them. Yeah. Most people are just only being fed bullshit by Microsoft, Google, whatever. And if we just plainly human to human explain the actual problems, in my experience, a lot of people are very reasonable about this and can understand these like, oh shit, this is a disarmament problem. It's not a race problem, it's a disarmament problem.
Mm.
Eliezer's book is coming out soon and has a nice title, which is If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And this is the core problem. This is the core problem. How do we, as a society, look into the future? We look into the future of civilization. Whether it's AGI or some other future technology, at some point, we will figure out how to build weapons that are so awful that they can destroy everything. And we, as a global civilization, have to then not do that. Otherwise, we're on a timer and we don't have a long future ahead of us. So this might be our first check, our first filter of can we work together somehow, find a way that we don't build the thing that kills everyone. If we can't do that, well, thanks for playing.
And just for listeners' reference, that's Eliezer Yudkowsky, who, believe it or not, can well and truly match Connor for his pessimism about the prospects for artificial general intelligence if we create it. So look, you're getting almost into an upbeat note there, Connor, and I want to finish on an upbeat note. It's probably easy for people to feel overwhelmed by this issue. I mean, as you say, solving it is very, very difficult. AI sits at a convergence of factors that makes policy making, I suppose, almost heroic to grapple with. It's technically arcane. Only a few people really understand it. The technology's borderless. Geopolitics are extremely non-conducive to global cooperation right now. It's very fast-moving. Near-future predictions are difficult. The financial incentives encourage haste, as I mentioned earlier about investment going into AI. The fact that companies turning over a few $100 million a year are valued at billions or hundreds of billions, which means obviously it's all about expectations of what they're going to do in the future. Connor, you call for a kind of grassroots civic action here, people talking to their representatives, building some sort of upward momentum and then using that to knit together higher levels of governance. Just talk us through what you're doing and what you've found the response is.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the right way to be talking about this. So I work quite closely with an organization called Control AI, which is a nonprofit advocacy group here in the UK. And so they actually just, I think yesterday or the day before, put out a fantastic piece written by Letitia about their experience briefing over 70 lawmakers in the UK about extinction risk. I highly recommend everyone read this. I'm sure it's going to be linked down in the show notes, which summarizes a lot of the experiences. The way it worked is that at Control AI, we started with, kind of coming to this year, we started doing what we call the Direct Institutional Plan, the DIP. The Direct Institutional Plan is the simplest possible plan that works or that could address the problem. It's very, very simple. You figure out what policies would be needed to prevent extinction for, say, 20 years. You write down those policies, and then you go to every relevant stakeholder, every relevant politician, and you, in good faith, make the case. This seems so trivial that you might even think, well, surely someone has tried that. Someone's already done that. The answer is no. No one has done this. This is, as far as we're aware, we're the first people, one of the first groups that have actually even tried to do this, especially at scale. And so we were told by every political consultant under the sun, oh, it's, what you're trying to do, it's way too hard. People won't commit to anything. They won't listen to you. They don't care. You don't have any favors or network or whatever, right? And so we started by creating a campaign statement, which says, Nobel Prize winners, AI scientists, and CEOs of leading AI companies have stated that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority. Specialized AIs, such as advancing science and medicine, boost growth and innovation, and public services. Superintelligent AI systems would compromise national and global security. The UK can secure the benefits in mitigating the risks of AI by delivering on its promise to introduce binding regulation of the most powerful AI systems. So you're a political guy. This is not a toothless statement. It mentions extinction. It's about binding regulation. This is a pretty strong call. And so we were told by every consultant in the world that this is way too strong. Or we'd have to trade so many favors because, it mentions binding regulation. It has the word extinction in it. It's way too strong. This was just not our experience whatsoever. We cold mailed just every parliamentarian in the UK. From this, we got 80 meetings no problem, where we would just give them a half-hour briefing of like, what is our concern? Why do we think this is real? Answer their questions, just really just good faith. Just, we're here to help. We're here to explain why we care about this problem, where it's coming from, and what can be done. And from this, we now have over 30 public supporters among parliamentarians, MPs, and lords in the UK. That's a 30% rate after one 30-minute meeting.
Impressive.
Everyone thought this would be impossible, but no, this is possible. And my experience is that, look, yes, politics is hard. We learned a lot. We had to iterate. We had to improve our arguments. We have to learn how to, do things better and so on. But for the most part, I think there's a part of democracy that gets forgotten sometimes. Is that democracy isn't, you have some politicians and they figure everything out and you lay on your couch. No, democracy also has a civic component. There's a component where you as a citizen also have a responsibility. Your politicians are not flawless. And I'm not saying this like, they're bad people. I'm saying literally, even if they're trying their best, they're not flawless. They don't know everything. There are many problems they have to deal with. Being a politician is a hard job. And your job as a citizen is also to, if there is an issue that's affecting you, that's affecting your community that you care about, it is part of the democratic process for you to say, all right, I'm going to help my politicians understand this issue. I'm going to think a lot about this, and I'm going to help them answer their questions so they can do something about this issue. And in our experience, people react extremely positively to this. They're often very thankful. They're like, wow, finally someone from AI is answering my questions. I remember having a very nice meeting with a quite conservative politician here in the UK. And, we explained to him our risks about AI. And he started asking questions and more. And then he started asking more and more basic questions. What even is an AI? Is this related to quantum or is that a different, really basic questions? And we just answered all his questions. And eventually he paused. And he was like, wait, you're trying to help me? And we're like, yes, sir. Anything else we were happy to answer your questions. And he was so thankful. He was like, no technical person talks to me. No one, I've never had young tech people sit down and just answer my questions. And this is the state of affairs. The state of affairs is that a lot of our most powerful politicians don't have anyone to talk to. They don't have any AI people who just will sit down and just take the time to just in good faith answer their questions and help them understand the issue. Because the truth is, people don't want AI to take over the world and kill their children. They don't. People truly don't want this. And they understand why this is bad. People aren't stupid, right? I found that there's only one group of people in the entire world who doesn't understand this issue, and that is AI people. Everyone else in the world understands this issue, and academics to a certain degree. They're the only people in the world who don't understand this issue. And the reason they don't understand it is the same reason why tobacco executives don't understand that tobacco causes cancer. It's the same issue. It's whatever. So I'm not too perturbed about this. The fundamental thing is that the bottleneck is much more in just being made aware of this. And this doesn't require super extreme political maneuvering or genius, writing and scientific, research. What it requires is mostly just actually putting in the work of actually coordinating with people, actually talking to people, explaining things to them, phrasing things in their language, being patient, contacting many, many people, and so on. And the good thing about this is that this scales. We have a playbook that scales, and you can read our playbook. You can read what Letitia wrote. You can have all of our materials that we use to brief people. You can replicate this playbook yourself. You don't even need our consent. You can just take our playbook and you can run with it. And this scales. So the way I see the world going well in the near future is that this scales. So both with Control AI, and I've also been starting a new project, which is much more grassroots and community driven, called Torchbearer, which is an online community that is focused on building a good future from civic bottoms up action and scalable action like this. I think this is how we get people to actually care. I don't think it's we trade, secrets in DC behind closed doors, in cigar smoke filled rooms. I don't think that's how this works. Not in the modern world. And this is not our experience of how we actually get things done and how we actually get people to support things. The next step is we have now drafted an actual bill that actually implements legislation that would stop ASI, at least for, say, 10 to 20 years. In the UK, we've briefed number 10, which is the Prime Minister's office here in the UK on this, and we're iterating on this. And now we're starting to build also an office in the US, where we're also going to be pushing these things. Is this all easy? No, all this is hard. Politics is hard, I understand. And also, there are some bad people involved, to be clear. A lot of people think all politicians are corrupt and evil and whatever. this is in my experience truly not true. There are some like there are some who are just like straight up evil, like straight up like holy shit. But this is truly not the majority. Most of them are just like severely overworked, have a lot of competing incentives. There's a lot of people feeding them like lies and manipulating them, and they're just in a tough situation. And we have to help.
Yep.
So if anyone, in the audience, if I can give one more piece of advice I've been giving to more and more people, because I think this is quite important, is how to do this kind of work without it taking over your life. There's a risk that happens here sometimes is that people find this problem so overwhelming or so scary that either they throw everything away and they throw themselves head in to the problem and they, lose the rest of their life and their stability and they burn out, or it's so overwhelming and they don't want to lose their life that they just don't do anything. So my recommendation for anyone who cares about this problem is what you should do is you should pick some amount of time per week that you can, spare. Can be an hour, can be 5 hours, can be a work day, whatever, some amount of time you can spare to work on this problem. It can be reading about the problem, contacting other people in the field, talking to your politicians. It can be sending me emails and asking me questions, whatever. And don't do more than that. Do it every week. Do your 1 hour or whatever every week, but don't do more than that. That's my recommendation.
And let me endorse that 100%. If I wasn't clear earlier on, certainly in my mind, it's the most consequential thing that will happen in our lifetimes. It's and quite possibly in all of human and world history. I just say one more time, the most prominent practitioners of this technology on the planet pretty much agree that we will no longer be the smartest entities on the planet within something like 5 to 10 years. So I think that's worth 1 hour a week of your time and your investigation and your intellectual curiosity. Connor, it's been great to hear your latest thoughts on this. Really appreciate you coming back on Stop the World. Thanks for the chat and good luck with your advocacy.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening, folks. We'll be back next week with a regular episode, but in the meantime, listen out tomorrow for a special short episode on ASPI's Cost of Defence report, which was released this week. Ciao!